Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow my honourable friend, the member for Glasgow North East, who is a tireless and passionate campaigner for his constituency, and one of the wonderful 2017 intake as well. Thank you. Areas with the greatest need and the lowest tax base and the least resources to otherwise have seemed to be suffering a much greater reduction than their wealthier counterparts. And Hull is no exception. And this isn't just what I'm saying, this is what the National Audit Office is saying as well. They've given powerful and informative information that there has been a disproportionate impact on Hull. And this is creating painful decisions. And this is further compounded by the fact that the central funding, Hull is reliant on 81% for its central funding, and that it is unable to replace this through local tax grants. Because just to give you one example, a local tax increase of 1% in Hull only raises £2.90 per head, whereas a local tax rate of 1% in the City of London raises £7.08 per head. I mean, this is a completely different situation. We have a Hull which is reliant on central government, receiving less money in central government than it ever did before. But even though statistics are very important, and much of this debate seems to be focused around statistics and around how much the percentage is of loss for each local area, we're forgetting the very human element of this. We're forgetting the people are at the heart of it, because the people at the heart of it who have been affected don't honestly care which government it is that introduced this to begin with. They don't care whose fault it is. They don't like politicians who point fingers at each other and say it wasn't you, it was you. What they care about is what is happening to them there and then on the ground. And so I'd like to talk actually about a couple who I met recently, who, to protect their anonymity, I'm going to refer to them as Lily and Paul. Now, Paul came to see me at my constituency recently, extremely upset and quite distressed when he came in there, and he was telling me about his wife. They were quite a young couple. They were only in their early 50s, but his wife had developed tumours on her spine. And these tumours had appeared from nowhere. No one had any idea that she was ill. She started with backache. She ended up in hospital. She ended up having tumours having to be operated on. And from that moment, her husband became her carer and had to do everything for her. They went from having a fit and active life where they were both in work to him looking after his wife, who was bedbound at the time. And at this point, he was practically at breaking point, as he told me how they actually met each other when they were 14 years old, and she was the only woman that he'd ever been in love with, and he still loved her, even though at that moment she was lying in the bed in their house, unable to leave the bedroom, unable to get down the stairs, because occupational therapy hadn't been round there to install a handrail. And they couldn't get a stair lift fitted because it was the wrong kind of stair lift. So she'd been discharged from hospital without a care plan, without adult social care packages available, and all she was doing was laying in their bed, while he'd got his daughter around to go and look after her, so he could come and tell me about the problems that he was facing and that they were facing. He said, unsurprisingly, she was suffering problems with her mental health. And I said, well, of course, I would suffer problems with my mental health if I was unable to leave my bed and just left there in constant pain. She was left in pain from the operation, from the tumour that was on her spine, and the drugs were making her drowsy and incoherent. To make matters even worse, the DWP informed her and them that she needed to attend a healthcare assessment. A woman who was bedbound in bed after having operations on her spine. Eventually they relented. He was dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, as well as seeing the woman who he'd loved from being 14 years old and still deeply loved then, in such pain and in such desperate situation. Eventually they came to see her to do an assessment of her. But he said she can't answer the questions properly because the amount of opium that she's on to deal with her pain means that she doesn't fully understand all the questions being answered. But he was told by the people doing the assessment on her that as her husband, he shouldn't be answering for her and he should allow her to answer the questions herself, even though she barely understood what was actually being said. He came into my constituency office just yesterday to tell me that they haven't declared her sick enough to qualify for the mobility part of the assessment for benefits. So he's been left unable to work. His wife, who he's desperately in love with, unable to get the support that she needs. Now being turned down for enhanced benefits, because goodness me, how sick do you have to be to get them if you're already on drugs that make you incoherent and you're laid there in your bed unable to move? I asked him about him. I said, what about you? Are you getting any respite care? Are you getting any care? And he said, I can't, because what happens to her if I become ill? What happens to her if I'm not there? And she doesn't fully understand because she's on the medication for pain. This is what people are facing. So when we sort of get back to talking between the front bench, let's not point fingers at each other. Let's not start saying your government did this, your government did this. Let's look at what is happening to people like that right now. This is what he is facing right now. And let's ask ourselves, when we see that life expectancy is dropping in my constituency, tell me then that this government's reforms have been successful and that it's not time to change. Tell me then how successful it is. Don't give me a quote about the amount of money. Tell me about the people's lives who are being changed because they're not getting the support that they need. Because until I see a real difference on the ground, then all the rest of it is just spin. So please come to the dispatch box, tell me you've listened, and tell me people like Paul and Lily will get the support that they need and not be left to suffer any longer.